What if I told you that America's most famous secret society held their meetings in public taverns, published their membership lists in newspapers, and invited crowds to watch their ceremonies? That the organization supposedly controlling world governments couldn't even get members to agree on what their own symbols meant? Freemasonry. The name alone conjures images of shadowy conspiracies, hidden rituals, and founding fathers plotting revolution by candlelight. But here's the thing about secret societies: they're much less interesting than you've been led to believe. Over the next couple of hours, we're going to explore 101 verified facts about Freemasonry in American history. Not the conspiracy theories, not the sensational rumors, just the documented, historical, often disappointingly mundane reality of guys in aprons trying to organize weekly meetings and arguing about candle budgets. So hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's talk about how America's most mysterious organization was actually just really into paperwork, starting with how they literally sailed here with receipts. Freemasonry arrived in America before the United States existed. So here's the thing about secret societies that aren't actually that secret. Freemasonry didn't mysteriously appear in America during some midnight ceremony involving candles and cryptic oaths. It just showed up like regular mail. British colonists brought their lodge charters across the Atlantic in the early 1700s, back when America was still just a collection of colonies arguing about taxes and where to put the next church. These weren't mystical revolutionaries plotting independence. They were merchants, officials, and craftsmen who wanted to continue their social club traditions from back home. Completely ordinary, completely documented. The first lodges operated openly, held public ceremonies, kept meticulous records. Nothing shadowy about it. They met in taverns, paid rent, argued about dues. Just Englishmen doing English things in a place that happened to be 3,000 miles from England. The whole organization predated American independence by decades, which makes conspiracy theories about Masonic founding fathers somewhat awkward chronologically. But we'll get to that particular rabbit hole soon enough. For now, just remember, Freemasonry was here first, minding its own business, before anyone thought about revolution. Several founding fathers were Freemasons, but many were not. Let's address the elephant in the historically inaccurate room. Yes, some founding fathers were Freemasons. George Washington, Mason, Benjamin Franklin, absolutely. Paul Revere, yep. But here's what conspiracy theories conveniently forget: most weren't. John Adams, not a Mason. Thomas Jefferson, nope. Samuel Adams, no. Alexander Hamilton, never joined. James Madison, not a member. The list of non-Mason founders is actually longer than the Mason list, which is inconvenient if you're trying to prove secret society control over American independence. The founding generation included lawyers, merchants, farmers, plantation owners, intellectuals, soldiers. Some happened to be Masons, most weren't. Their Masonic membership was about as politically relevant as their favorite breakfast foods. Correlation isn't causation, a statistical concept that conspiracy theorists treat like an optional suggestion. Yes, prominent men joined lodges. Prominent men also attended churches, joined business clubs, participated in countless other social organizations. None of those secretly controlled the revolution either. Membership overlapped with political involvement because colonial America was a small world where educated men knew each other. Mystery optional, reality disappointing. Freemasonry did not create the American Revolution. I hate to break this to anyone whose entire worldview depends on secret societies orchestrating history, but Freemasonry didn't create the American Revolution. Not even a little bit. The revolution happened because of taxes, representation, trade restrictions, political philosophy, military conflict, economic interests, and about 17 other completely documented historical factors that had nothing to do with lodge meetings. Did some revolutionaries happen to be Masons? Sure. Did some loyalists happen to be Masons? Also, yes, awkwardly enough. Were lodges secretly coordinating military strategy and political rebellion? Absolutely not. Masonic lodges explicitly avoided political discussions. They banned partisan arguments. They included members on both sides of the imperial conflict. If Freemasonry had orchestrated the revolution, you'd expect unanimous Mason support for independence. Instead, lodges fractured along the same political lines as the broader population. Some members supported independence, others remained loyal to Britain. Most just wanted to attend their weekly meetings without everything becoming a political disaster. The revolution happened around Freemasonry, not because of it. Causation requires evidence. Evidence exists for lots of revolutionary causes. Freemasonry isn't among them. Sorry. Early American Masonic lodges often met in ordinary taverns and inns. If you're imagining secret Masonic meetings in hidden underground chambers accessible only through trapped staircases and password protected doors, let me redirect your expectations towards something far less exciting. Taverns. Regular, ordinary, slightly sticky taverns where everyone drank and argued about local politics. Early American Masonic lodges met wherever they could rent a room cheaply, which usually meant the upstairs space at a local inn or tavern. The Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, the Tun Tavern in Philadelphia, just normal establishments where normal people gathered. Lodges would rent a room for the evening, hold their meeting, then often stay afterward for drinks because the bar was literally downstairs. Convenient, practical, not mysterious. The tavern owner knew when Masons were meeting. Patrons saw them arrive and leave. Sometimes non-members could hear them upstairs conducting their rituals, which probably sounded like organized mumbling with occasional applause. This visibility undermines the whole secret society narrative pretty thoroughly. Secret organizations don't rent public spaces and advertise meeting times. They definitely don't meet above bars where drunk people might wander in accidentally. But here we are, Freemasonry, mysteriously meeting in the most obvious locations possible. Membership records for many early lodges were public, not secret. Here's a fact that should have ended conspiracy theories before they started, but somehow didn't. Early Masonic lodges kept public membership records, not hidden archives accessible only to initiated members. Public records. You could literally find out who belonged to your local lodge by asking. Many lodges published membership lists in newspapers or displayed them in public spaces. This wasn't carelessness, it was intentional transparency. Lodges wanted communities to know who their members were because public reputation mattered. If your organization emphasized virtue and morality, you needed citizens to trust you, which meant operating openly. Membership rosters, meeting times, officer elections, all documented and available. Modern historians can access these records easily. Archives hold them. Libraries preserve them. You can see who joined, when they joined, what positions they held, how much they paid in dues. It's extraordinarily well documented for a supposedly secret society. The only secret parts were certain ritual details reserved for members, which is pretty standard for any organization with initiation ceremonies. But membership itself, public, transparent, boring, which apparently made it perfect fodder for wild speculation because humans prefer exciting fiction over accessible documentation. Freemasons held public cornerstone laying ceremonies that anyone could attend. Despite all the secrecy mythology, Freemasons regularly performed very public ceremonies that attracted huge crowds. Cornerstone laying ceremonies for public buildings were major civic events. Masons would process through streets in full regalia. Aprons, jewels, sashes, the whole visual spectacle while spectators lined up to watch. They'd gather at the construction site, perform their ceremonial ritual right there in broad daylight, often with government officials and community leaders participating. Then everyone would celebrate together. Newspapers covered these events extensively, describing exactly what happened, what symbols appeared, what speeches were given. The ceremonies weren't hidden, they were advertisements, public demonstrations of Masonic civic participation and community values. Anyone could attend. Most people did attend because public ceremonies with costumes and symbolism were basically the best entertainment available before television existed. The U.S. Capitol building? Masons laid the cornerstone publicly in 1793 with George Washington participating. The whole thing was documented, celebrated, reported. Nothing secret, nothing sinister. Just elaborate public ritual that everyone enjoyed watching. But somehow this public visibility got twisted into proof of secret control. Because apparently performing ceremonies publicly means you're hiding something. Logic, Masonic symbols, were widely recognized by non-members in early America, the square and compass. That iconic Masonic symbol everyone recognizes, it wasn't a secret code in early America, it was just around. Everyone knew what it meant. Masons displayed it openly on buildings, in public ceremonies, in newspaper advertisements. The symbols weren't mysterious or hidden. They were recognizable branding, like a logo for the local social club. The square represented moral rectitude and fair dealing. The compass symbolized self-control and keeping yourself within proper bounds. These weren't ancient, esoteric secrets. They were teaching metaphors based on actual tools that stonemasons used, which made sense given the organization's name. Regular people understood the basic symbolism without needing initiation into hidden mysteries. Children probably learned about the square and compass the same way they learned about flags or church symbols. Through simple cultural exposure, Masonic symbols appeared so frequently in public spaces that they became normalized, familiar, unremarkable. Which is ironic because later generations, having lost that cultural familiarity, started treating the symbols as mysterious and potentially sinister. But in early America, just ordinary civic imagery that everyone recognized and nobody particularly worried about. Familiarity breeds indifference, not conspiracy theories. Usually, Freemasonry functioned as one of the first organized social networks in the colonies. Before Facebook, before LinkedIn, before any digital social networking existed, humans still needed ways to connect with each other beyond immediate family and neighbors. Colonial America had churches for religious community and taverns for informal socializing, but few structured organizations that brought diverse people together regularly. Freemasonry filled that gap. It created networks connecting men across different trades, social classes, and even colonies. A merchant traveling from Boston to Charleston could visit a local lodge, present his credentials, and suddenly have friendly contacts in a strange city. This networking wasn't sinister. It was survival strategy in a world without modern communication and infrastructure. If you needed a trustworthy business contact, legal advice, or just a friendly face in an unfamiliar place, Masonic connections helped. The organization functioned like an 18th century social network, creating bridges between communities that otherwise remained isolated. This networking had real practical value, which explains why so many people joined. Not because of philosophical enlightenment or secret knowledge, but because connections mattered. They still do. Freemasonry just formalized social networking before technology made it digital. Same human need, different infrastructure, less data mining. Lodges often served as community meeting spaces, not private enclaves. Masonic lodges didn't exist in isolation from their communities. They were integrated into local civic life in surprisingly ordinary ways. When lodges rented tavern rooms or built their own halls, Those spaces often served multiple community purposes beyond Masonic meetings. Local groups would rent lodge halls for other gatherings. Town meetings happened there. Community organizations met there. The space belonged to the Masons, sure, but it served the broader community as one of the few available public meeting rooms. This dual function made lodges central to civic infrastructure, especially in smaller towns where gathering spaces were scarce. The building might host a Masonic meeting Tuesday, a town council Wednesday, a lecture series Thursday. Completely normal civic facility usage. This accessibility contradicts the secret enclave narrative. Organizations hiding from public scrutiny don't offer their buildings for community events. They don't integrate themselves into civic infrastructure. They don't make themselves essential to local organizational life. But Masons did exactly that, functioning as both private fraternity and public resource. The boundary between private and public was more porous than conspiracy theories suggest. Communities needed spaces, lodges provided them, simple arrangement that benefited everyone. Many Americans joined Freemasonry simply for companionship and stability. Let's talk about human psychology for a moment. When men in colonial and early America joined Masonic lodges, what were they actually seeking? Deep philosophical transformation, ancient wisdom, political power, maybe some. But mostly they wanted friends. They wanted somewhere to go on Tuesday nights. They wanted structure and routine in chaotic lives. They wanted to belong to something larger than themselves. These are fundamentally human needs that haven't changed in centuries. Freemasonry offered reliable companionship through formal brotherhood, regular meetings providing predictable routine, shared rituals creating meaning and connection. For men especially, who didn't have the informal social networks women built through household cooperation, lodges answered crucial social needs. You could show up, participate in familiar rituals, share a meal, joke around, then go home feeling less alone. The philosophy was fine. The symbols were interesting. But the real draw was human connection. Friendship formalized through organizational structure. This isn't cynical. It's honest about what actually motivated membership for most people. We join organizations for community first, ideology second. Always have. Freemasonry succeeded because it understood this. Mystery was optional. Belonging was essential. Freemasons did not vote or act as a political bloc. If Freemasons controlled politics through coordinated voting, you'd expect evidence. Lodge meetings discussing candidates, coordinated endorsements, unified political action. None of that existed. Masonic lodges explicitly prohibited political organizing within their meetings. Members held wildly different political views and supported different candidates. A lodge might include Federalists and Democratic Republicans sitting next to each other, maintaining civil friendship despite opposing each other politically outside the lodge walls. This diversity prevented any unified political action. If Masons voted individually based on personal convictions, not lodge instructions. There were no secret ballots where Masons coordinated their votes. No backroom deals where Grand Masters directed political outcomes. Lodge business focused on ritual, charity, membership, finances, never electoral strategy. This political neutrality was intentional and necessary. The moment lodges became political, they'd fracture along partisan lines and destroy the brotherhood they'd worked to build, so they simply didn't go there. Politics happened elsewhere. Lodge meetings remained neutral space where men of different political persuasions practiced getting along despite disagreements. Revolutionary concept, apparently. Still is. Masonic lodges included both patriots and loyalists. During the Revolution, here's an awkward fact for anyone claiming Freemasons orchestrated American independence. Lodges included members on both sides of the conflict. Some Masons supported the revolution enthusiastically. Others remained loyal to Britain. Many probably just wanted the whole mess to end so they could return to normal life and regular lodge meetings. This internal division proves Freemasonry had no unified political agenda. How could they orchestrate revolution when members were actively fighting each other? Some lodges tried maintaining neutrality, welcoming both patriots and loyalists to meetings, attempting to preserve brotherhood despite political warfare. Other lodges fractured completely, with members choosing sides and sometimes forming separate lodges based on political loyalty. The situation was messy, complicated, deeply human. Not the coordinated conspiracy that mythology suggests. Real organizations contain real humans with real disagreements. Freemasonry experienced the same political divisions, tearing apart families, churches, communities everywhere in revolutionary America. Lodge membership didn't create political unity. It just gave divided men one more space where they had to navigate their differences. Sometimes they managed, sometimes they failed. Always complicated. Some Freemasons fought on opposing sides of the same war. The American Revolution wasn't just a war between nations, it was a civil war splitting communities, families, and yes, Masonic lodges. Brothers who'd shared meals and performed rituals together found themselves on opposite sides of battlefields. Some joined the Continental Army fighting for independence. Others enlisted in British forces defending the crown. Imagine that tension. Men who'd pledged brotherhood facing each other in combat. Masonic oaths emphasizing mutual aid and protection, suddenly complicated by military duty requiring them to potentially harm each other. Some Masons allegedly recognized each other across battle lines through subtle signs, though whether this led to mercy or just awkward recognition is debated. The point is, Freemasonry didn't prevent or transcend the conflict. It got caught in it, fractured by it, damaged by it like every other institution. No secret society controlling events would allow such internal contradiction. The reality of Masons fighting Masons proves the organization had no unified agenda, no coordinated strategy, no hidden control. Just men caught in historical circumstances larger than their fraternal bonds, doing what they thought right despite shared membership in a social club that suddenly felt very inadequate for the moment. No evidence shows Masonic lodges planned military or political strategy. Despite centuries of speculation, actual historical evidence for Masonic lodges planning revolutionary military or political strategy is non existent. Researchers have examined lodge minute books, correspondence, financial records, membership rosters, all the documentation that survived from the revolutionary period. They found discussions of ritual procedures, arguments about dues collection, decisions about charity cases, debates over accepting new members, completely mundane organizational business. What they didn't find: battle plans, political strategies, coordination with Continental Congress, conspiracy to overthrow British rule. Nothing even remotely resembling secret coordination of revolutionary activities. If lodges had been planning revolution, someone would have written it down. Organizations document their important decisions. The complete absence of such documentation is itself evidence. Either Masons were extraordinarily careful to destroy all traces of their conspiracy, which seems unlikely given how much other documentation survived, or, and stay with me here, they simply weren't conspiring. Lodge meetings focused on lodge business, political and military strategy happened elsewhere, correlation mistaken for causation, again. People see connections between Masonic membership and political prominence, assume causation, ignore the complete lack of supporting evidence. Tale as old as conspiracy theories themselves. Freemasonry discouraged political arguments inside lodge meetings. Masonic lodges didn't just avoid political organizing, they actively discouraged political discussion altogether. The rule was explicit: No politics in lodge. No debates about governance. No arguments about candidates. No partisan positioning. This wasn't censorship, it was self preservation. Lodges brought together men with diverse political views who needed to maintain brotherhood despite disagreements. The only way to achieve that was removing politics from the equation entirely. Outside the lodge, members could argue all they wanted about taxes, representation, independence, whatever political issue consumed public attention. But inside, everyone checked partisanship at the door. They gathered as brothers, not as political opponents. This discipline required genuine effort, especially during revolutionary turmoil when politics dominated everything. But maintaining this boundary protected lodges from the factional destruction consuming other institutions. Churches split over political loyalty, communities fractured, families divided. Lodges survived imperfectly but noticeably by refusing to let politics dominate their meetings. They created neutral space where Americans practiced treating each other decently despite political differences. That practice mattered. Still does. Though apparently it's still really difficult for humans to manage without explicit rules preventing political toxicity. Masonic symbols came from medieval stone working tools, not secret codes. The square, compass, level, plumb, all those iconic Masonic symbols that conspiracy theorists analyze for hidden meanings, they came from actual construction tools. Real tools that real stonemasons used to build real buildings. That's it, that's the origin. Medieval stonemasons had guilds that used their professional tools as symbols representing moral qualities. A square ensures right angles. Symbolically, it represents moral rectitude and dealing fairly with others. A compass draws perfect circles by maintaining fixed boundaries. Symbolically, it represents self control and keeping your behavior within proper limits. These were teaching metaphors, not secret codes hiding ancient wisdom. The connection between physical tools and abstract virtues was straightforward enough that regular people understood it without initiation into mysteries. When Freemasonry emerged as a fraternal organization in the 17th and 18th centuries, it borrowed this existing symbolic system because it worked. The metaphors were clear, the imagery was recognizable, the lessons were practical, no hidden conspiracy required. Just clever use of familiar objects to teach moral principles through memorable symbolism. But apparently clear, documented origins are less interesting than speculation about ancient secrets. So people invented better stories. The square symbolized moral behavior, not authority or control. Let's talk about what Masonic symbols actually meant versus what conspiracy theories claim they mean. The square, that right-angled tool, symbolized moral correctness and ethical behavior. In construction, a square ensures angles are true and structures are sound. Metaphorically, it represents treating others fairly, acting with integrity, behaving morally. Being on the square meant dealing honestly, keeping your word, maintaining ethical standards in business and personal life. This symbolism was common knowledge in early America. Everyone understood the metaphor. It wasn't code for authority or control or secret power. It was a visual reminder to act correctly, to meet your moral obligations, to treat others as you'd want to be treated. Revolutionary stuff, truly. Conspiracy theorists see the square displayed in Masonic imagery and imagine it represents hidden control mechanisms or coded messages. But the historical evidence is overwhelming. It just meant be a good person. Use the square tool metaphorically in your life. Build your character with the same care Masons build structures. Treat others fairly. Simple moral philosophy illustrated through familiar objects, which is lovely, honestly. Moral education through carpentry metaphors. Though apparently not exciting enough, So people invented secret meanings that historical evidence doesn't support. Creativity wins over documentation, always. The compass symbol represented self restraint, not domination. The compass, the tool for drawing circles, carried similarly straightforward symbolism. In construction, a compass creates perfect circles by maintaining fixed points and boundaries. You can't draw accurate circles without controlling the compass properly. Metaphorically, this represented self control, self restraint, keeping yourself within appropriate boundaries, living a balanced life, not overreaching, controlling your desires and impulses. The compass reminded Masons to govern themselves, to exercise discipline, to stay within moral and ethical limits. Not exactly world domination imagery, despite what conspiracy theorists claim. The symbolism emphasized personal responsibility and inner discipline, not external control over others. Circumscribing your desires was the phrase, using the compass to draw boundaries around yourself, not others. It's introspective moral philosophy, not authoritarian power fantasies. Historical evidence supports this interpretation overwhelmingly. Masonic writings, lectures, rituals all explain the compass symbolism in terms of self governance and personal discipline. But that's boring compared to imagining secret societies using compass symbols to represent global domination. So people chose the exciting interpretation over the documented one. Tale as old as human imagination versus historical accuracy. Imagination usually wins in popular consciousness. Masonic rituals were designed to teach ethical lessons, not hide information. Freemasonry's rituals, the ceremonies that members performed during meetings, existed to teach moral and ethical lessons through dramatic presentation. That's it. That's their purpose. They weren't hiding information, they were teaching philosophy through experiential learning. The rituals used symbolism, allegory, and structured progression to impart lessons about virtue, morality, brotherhood, self improvement. Kind of like elaborate plays where participants acted out scenarios illustrating ethical principles. The secrecy existed because the rituals were meant to be experienced, not just read about. Knowing what happens intellectually differs from participating emotionally and symbolically. Religious ceremonies work similarly. Baptism means more when you experience it than when someone describes it. Masonic rituals follow this logic. The content wasn't particularly secret. Former members published exposés revealing ritual details repeatedly throughout history, but the experience remained meaningful, primarily to participants. The lessons taught were conventional moral philosophy. Be honest, help others, improve yourself, treat people fairly. Nothing radical, nothing hidden. Just ethical education delivered through memorable, ritualistic framework. But humans love mystery, so private ceremonies became secret rituals hiding ancient knowledge in public imagination. Reality disappointed. Mythology compensated. Most lodge meetings were routine, administrative, and surprisingly ordinary. If you want to know what really happened at Masonic lodge meetings? Here's the thrilling answer. They discussed routine organizational business. The treasurer reported on finances. Someone mentioned Brother Smith owed 3 months of dues. They debated whether to spend money repairing the lodge room ceiling. They voted on accepting new member applications. They planned upcoming charity projects. Someone read the minutes from the last meeting. They performed ritual degree work, which sounds mysterious, but was basically their version of Sunday school lessons delivered through symbolic ceremony. Then they ate together, talked, joked around, went home. That was it. That was the typical meeting. Boring organizational maintenance that every club, organization, or association conducts to function. The minute books that survive document this mundane reality extensively. Pages and pages of treasury reports, membership votes, administrative decisions, minor disputes over procedures. Nothing remotely resembling secret conspiracy planning or world domination strategy sessions. Just regular guys managing a regular organization, doing regular organizational things. But this ordinary reality couldn't compete with imagination, so people invented better stories. Mystery sells. Administrative competence doesn't. So Masonic Lodge meetings became sinister gatherings in popular mythology, despite documentary evidence revealing them as basically PTA meetings with more symbolism and better aprons. Freemasonry arrived in America through British colonial influence. So, here's the thing about secret societies. They're never quite as secret as you'd think, especially when they literally sailed across the ocean with paperwork. Freemasonry didn't mysteriously appear in America like some midnight ritual gone wrong. It arrived the boring way, through British colonists who brought their lodge charters with them like really formal luggage. Picture this: men stepping off ships in the early 1700s, seasick and exhausted, but absolutely determined to continue their weekly meetings about brotherhood and moral philosophy. Because apparently surviving smallpox and building a civilization from scratch wasn't enough scheduling conflict. These weren't rogue mystics. They were merchants, officials, and craftsmen who wanted the same social club they'd had back home. The lodges operated openly, rented rooms, kept records. It was all very administrative, very British, very much not a conspiracy, which makes the whole thing even stranger when you consider how much mystery got attached to it later. Early lodges were especially common in port cities like Boston and Philadelphia. If you wanted to find a Masonic lodge in colonial America, you didn't need a treasure map or a secret handshake whispered at midnight. You just needed to go to a port city. Boston, Philadelphia, Charleston, these were the hubs. And it makes sense, right? Port cities were where people actually were. Ships came in, trade happened, information flowed. You had merchants meeting sailors, meeting printers, meeting lawyers, all crammed into the same muddy streets trying to make a living. Lodges thrived there because, well, there were enough people to fill a room. Starting a lodge in the middle of nowhere meant convincing 6 farmers to ride through a forest once a week for philosophical discussions, which sounds exhausting. In cities, though, you could meet after work, share a meal, talk about virtue or whatever, then walk home. Convenient, practical, not mysterious at all. But the very thing that made lodges normal also made them targets later. Many lodge members were artisans, printers, and shopkeepers, not elites. Let's clear something up right now because this myth refuses to die. When you picture a Freemason in 1776, you probably imagine some powdered wig aristocrat plotting world domination over brandy. Wrong. Most Masons were just guys. Artisans, printers, shopkeepers, the kind of men who worked with their hands, ran small businesses, fixed things. Sure, some wealthy merchants and lawyers joined too, but the lodges weren't country clubs for the elite. They were middle class gathering spots. A silversmith could sit next to a ship captain, and a tailor next to a clerk. And everyone got a vote on lodge business. This was radical, by the way, in a world still obsessed with hereditary rank. These men weren't born into power, they earned respect through work and character. That's what the lodges emphasized: merit over pedigree, which is lovely in theory. In practice, it meant a lot of guys in aprons having very earnest conversations about self improvement while eating bread. Joining a lodge often required character references, not wealth. Here's a fun fact that probably won't help you fall asleep, but might restore a little faith in humanity. You couldn't buy your way into a Masonic lodge. Shocking, I know. In an era when money could get you almost anything, titles, land, a decent wig, Freemasonry actually required something harder to fake: a good reputation. If you wanted to join, you needed existing members to vouch for you. They'd ask around, check your character, make sure you weren't, a notorious liar or a violent drunk or someone who owed money to half the town. It was like a background check, but run by your neighbors over ale. This wasn't perfect, obviously. People can be fooled, but the intent was genuine. Lodges wanted members who would contribute positively, not just men with full pockets. The application process could take weeks or even months. You'd wait. They'd vote. Imagine being blackballed by a group of guys in aprons. Lodges charged modest dues to cover rent, candles, and food. If you're expecting tales of treasure hoards and gold-lined secret vaults, I'm about to disappoint you profoundly. Masonic lodges ran on budgets tighter than your aunt's holiday grocery planning. Members paid dues, sure, but we're talking modest amounts. Enough to cover rent for a meeting room, candles for light, maybe some bread and meat for after. This wasn't a money-making scheme. It was a cost-sharing arrangement among men who wanted a space to gather. Candles, by the way, were expensive in the 1700s. Meetings happened at night because everyone worked during the day, so you needed light, which meant buying candles, which meant collecting dues. Riveting financial logistics, I know. But this is important because it shows how ordinary the whole operation was. No one was getting rich. Treasurers kept careful records of every shilling spent. Arguments probably happened over whether to splurge on better wine. The kind of drama that makes you wonder how conspiracy theories ever took root. Meetings were often followed by shared meals or drinks. After spending an evening discussing moral philosophy and performing symbolic rituals involving compasses and squares, what did Freemasons do? They ate. Because of course they did. Humans have been combining serious meetings with food since the invention of both meetings and food. Lodges often arranged for simple meals after their formal business concluded. Bread, cheese, meat, if they could afford it, ale or wine to wash it down. This wasn't gluttony, it was community building. Breaking bread together, literally, helped forge bonds between members. You're more likely to trust someone after you've shared a meal with them. It's basic human psychology wrapped in 18th century table manners. These meals were called table lodges in some places, and they had their own little rituals, toasts, songs, jokes probably. Imagine sitting in a tavern room, candles burning low, everyone relaxed and laughing after 2 hours of serious ritual. That's Freemasonry, not shadowy plots, just men eating together. Early lodges kept handwritten minute books, many of which survive. Today, here's something beautifully mundane. Freemasons were obsessed with paperwork. Every meeting, someone took minutes. They recorded who attended, what they discussed, who got initiated, who owed dues. All of it written by hand in careful script, stored in leather-bound books that smelled like ink and candle wax. And here's the kicker. Many of those books still exist. You can go to archives and historical societies and actually read them. Original documents from the 1700s, detailing the completely ordinary operations of colonial lodges. There's no hidden code, no secret conspiracy revealed in invisible ink. Just records showing that on a particular Tuesday in 1768, brother so-and-so was late again, and the treasurer reported they'd spent too much on candles. It's shockingly boring, which is exactly why it's valuable. These minute books prove that lodges operated openly, kept official records, and functioned like any other civic organization. But people ignored this evidence for centuries. Lodge officers were elected democratically by members. In an age when kings ruled by divine right and social rank determined everything, Freemasonry did something genuinely radical. They voted. Every year, lodge members elected their officers democratically. The guy running the meeting, called the worshipful master, which sounds fancier than it was, got chosen by his peers, not appointed by wealth or birth. Same with the treasurer, secretary, and other positions. One member, one vote, majority rule. This was shockingly egalitarian for the time. A wealthy merchant had the same voting power as a working craftsman, and if the worshipful master did a terrible job, they'd elect someone else next year. No one had power forever. It rotated. This structure mirrored emerging democratic ideals in America, which makes sense since many early American leaders were Masons who believed in merit-based governance. They learned these principles in lodge meeting, practicing equality in a room full of candles when the world outside was anything but equal. Members could be suspended for poor behavior. Freemasonry preached brotherhood and moral improvement, but they weren't naive about human nature. Members could absolutely get suspended or expelled for bad behavior. Fight with another member? Gone. Show up drunk repeatedly? Out. Cheat someone in business? Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Lodges had standards, and they enforced them through votes and disciplinary hearings. It was like being grounded by a committee of your peers wearing aprons. The Minute books document these cases in careful detail. Brother Smith suspended for 3 months due to conduct unbecoming. Brother Jones expelled for repeated absence without excuse. These weren't arbitrary punishments. Members got hearings, chances to explain themselves, opportunities to apologize and reform. But if someone consistently violated the rules or damaged the lodge's reputation, out they went. This internal accountability mattered because lodges depended on public trust. If your organization emphasized virtue and morality, you couldn't let members behave terribly without consequence. Lodges emphasized discipline and order. During chaotic times, colonial America was, to put it mildly, a mess. Wars, disease, political upheaval, economic instability. Daily life involved navigating genuine chaos, with very few institutions offering stability or structure. Enter Freemasonry, stage left, with its strict meeting schedules, formal rituals, and obsessive rule following. In a world where nothing felt certain, lodges provided predictable routine. Meetings happened on the same night each week. The same officers sat in the same chairs. The same rituals unfolded in the same order, word for word. This repetition wasn't boring, it was comforting. You knew what to expect. And when the world outside felt overwhelming, having one place where order prevailed mattered. Men showed up exhausted from work, worried about money or politics or survival, and found a space governed by clear rules and mutual respect. For a few hours, chaos paused. Everything had structure, purpose, meaning. Then the meeting ended and you stepped back into the messy world. But you'd had a break. Freemasonry offered structure in an era without many social institutions. Think about colonial America's social infrastructure for a second. What did people have? Church, obviously. Family networks, if you were lucky. And then, not much. No community centers. No organized clubs beyond taverns. No social safety nets. If you needed support, structure, or simply human connection outside your immediate family, options were limited. Freemasonry filled that gap. It offered organized fellowship, regular meetings, shared rituals, mutual aid. For men especially, who didn't have the informal networks women built through household cooperation, lodges provided crucial social architecture. You'd join, attend meetings, form friendships, participate in something larger than yourself. The rituals gave meaning. The brotherhood gave belonging. The structure gave purpose. This wasn't about mystical secrets or hidden power. It was about humans creating community where little existed otherwise. In cities, you had options. On the frontier, isolation could be crushing. A lodge meant you weren't alone. Lodges often helped members during illness or financial hardship. Here's where Freemasonry gets genuinely touching in a very practical way. Members took care of each other. If someone got sick, the lodge would organize visits, maybe help with their business or family while they recovered. If someone faced financial disaster, fire destroyed their shop, crops failed, debts piled up, the lodge could provide emergency funds from their shared treasury. This wasn't charity in the condescending sense. It was mutual aid among equals who understood that luck was fickle and disaster could strike anyone. Today, you're healthy and prosperous. Tomorrow, you're bedridden with fever and broke. The lodge was insurance when insurance barely existed. Brothers would contribute what they could, and the money went to whoever needed it most. Widows of deceased members sometimes received support too. It was formalized kindness, structured, reliable, documented in those minute books, alongside candle expenses and membership votes. This practical brotherhood mattered far more to most members than any philosophical teachings. Many Masons joined for community, not philosophy. Let's be honest about human motivation for a second. When men joined Masonic lodges in colonial and early America, were they primarily seeking deep philosophical enlightenment and moral transformation? Maybe some were, but mostly they wanted friends. They wanted somewhere to go on Tuesday nights. They wanted structure and routine in chaotic lives. They wanted to belong to something larger than themselves. These are fundamentally human needs that haven't changed in centuries. Freemasonry offered reliable companionship through formal brotherhood, regular meetings providing predictable routine, shared rituals creating meaning and connection. For men especially, lodges answered crucial social needs. You could show up, participate in familiar rituals, share a meal, joke around, then go home feeling less alone. The philosophy was fine. The symbols were interesting. But the real draw was human connection. Friendship formalized through organizational structure. This isn't cynical, it's honest about what actually motivated membership for most people. Lodges were more common in cities than on the frontier. Geography shaped Freemasonry in America more than any secret philosophy ever did. Cities had lodges, the frontier, not so much. And the reason was painfully practical. You need people in the same place to form a lodge, preferably enough people that when someone gets sick or travels, you still have enough members for a meeting. In Boston or Philadelphia, gathering 7 or 10 men for Tuesday night meetings was easy. Everyone lived within walking distance. You could rent a room, collect dues, maintain continuity. On the frontier, though, neighbors might live miles apart. Traveling to weekly meetings meant hours on horseback through difficult terrain. In winter, forget it. So, frontier communities often went without lodges for years, sometimes decades, until enough population concentrated to make one viable. This meant Freemasonry remained primarily urban well into the 19th century, concentrated where civilization was most dense. Mystery requires meeting attendance. Can't have brotherhood without brothers actually showing up. Rural lodges developed more slowly. Due to travel difficulties, when rural communities finally did establish lodges, the challenges were immediate and constant. Everything that made city lodges work, regular attendance, consistent meetings, collecting dues, became exponentially harder when members lived miles apart on bad roads. Imagine promising to show up every week, knowing it meant a 2-hour ride each way, possibly in darkness, definitely in whatever weather descended. Rain, snow, mud that swallowed wagon wheels. And this was for a voluntary social organization, not survival. The commitment was real. Rural lodges adapted by meeting less frequently, maybe monthly instead of weekly. They'd combine meetings with other social events to justify the travel. They'd suspend operations during planning and harvest seasons when everyone was too busy. Membership stayed small, Record keeping got irregular. These weren't deficiencies, they were realistic adaptations to frontier life. The lodges that survived in rural areas often became deeply important to their communities precisely because forming them required such effort. Freemasonry existed before, during, and after the Revolution. Here's a fact that disrupts a lot of conspiracy theories. Freemasonry didn't magically appear to orchestrate the American Revolution, then vanish into the shadows afterward. It existed before anyone thought about independence. It continued throughout the war. It carried on afterward. Same organization, same structure, same basic purpose. The revolution happened around Freemasonry, not because of it. Yes, many revolutionary leaders were Masons. We'll get to that. But correlation isn't causation, a distinction conspiracy theorists ignore with impressive dedication. Lodges existed in the 1730s and 40s, decades before revolutionary sentiment emerged. They weathered the war like everything else, struggling with shortages and disrupted meetings. Then they rebuilt and expanded after independence, adapting to the new nation while maintaining their core identity. This continuity actually proves Freemasonry's ordinariness. Revolutionary conspiracies don't casually continue holding weekly meetings and recording dues collections for a century. Social organizations with genuine community value do. Lodges did not dissolve after independence. You'd think if Freemasonry had been created specifically to achieve American independence, the lodges would have dissolved once that mission was accomplished, right? Like, great job, everyone, we did it, independence achieved, let's close up shop and go home. But no. Not only did lodges continue after the revolution, they actually expanded rapidly. New lodges formed across the new nation throughout the 1780s and 90s. Membership grew, existing lodges stabilized and formalized their operations. This growth suggests that whatever Freemasonry was providing, community, structure, mutual aid, fellowship, remained valuable regardless of political circumstances. The war ended, but people still needed belonging. Veterans returned home needing social connections. New communities formed, wanting institutions to bind them together. Lodges answered those needs, same as before. If anything, the post-war period proved Freemasonry's value had nothing to do with revolution and everything to do with basic human social requirements. We can live without conspiracies. We can't really live without community. Revolutionary leaders often joined lodges before politics, not after. Here's how the conspiracy theory usually goes. Powerful men joined Freemasonry to gain political connections and orchestrate rebellion. Here's what actually happened. Young men joined local lodges for social reasons, developed leadership skills through lodge offices, made professional connections, and then some later became involved in politics. The causation runs backward from how people imagine it. Benjamin Franklin joined a lodge in 1731, 45 years before independence. George Washington became a Mason in 1752. Sorry, when he was 20, and nobody thought he'd become anything special politically. They weren't joining to plot revolution. They were joining because lodges offered structure, fellowship, and opportunities to practice leadership in a safe environment. Years later, when political circumstances demanded leadership, men who'd learned organizational skills in lodges applied them elsewhere. Correlation, not conspiracy. It's like saying everyone who attended the same high school planned to overthrow the government because several graduates later became politicians. Some lodges closed temporarily. During wartime shortages, war is terrible for voluntary organizations that depend on candles, rent, and members showing up alive. The Revolutionary War disrupted Masonic lodges significantly, though less dramatically than you might expect. Some closed temporarily when members enlisted and left town. Others suspended meetings during periods of occupation or intense fighting. Practical concerns dominated. You can't hold a meeting if half your members are besieging Boston and the other half are trying not to starve. Candles became expensive and scarce. Remember, lodges needed light for evening meetings, and wartime shortages made that difficult. Rent got harder to pay when members couldn't contribute dues. Food for post meeting meals became luxury, so lodges adapted. Some met irregularly when circumstances allowed. Others paused completely, planning to resume after peace returned. These weren't dramatic decisions about loyalty or conspiracy. They were practical responses to resource scarcity and member availability. The lodges that survived often did so because dedicated members kept minute books safe and maintained just enough continuity to rebuild later. Military lodges moved with regiments during the Revolution. Now, here's something genuinely interesting that gets overlooked in favor of conspiracy theories: traveling military lodges. During the Revolution, some military regiments had their own lodges that moved with the troops. British regiments had done this for years. Military lodges maintained morale and provided structure in chaotic wartime conditions. American forces adopted the practice. A regiment would receive a traveling warrant, allowing them to hold lodge meetings wherever they camped. They'd pack up their ritual items, minimal as they were, and carry them from battlefield to camp to battlefield. Imagine that. Soldiers fighting all day, then gathering at night around campfires for Masonic meetings, trying to maintain some shred of normalcy and brotherhood while everything around them was death and chaos. These military lodges helped soldiers cope, gave them routine when routine was scarce, connected them to something larger than immediate survival. It wasn't about politics or strategy. It was about maintaining humanity during inhumane circumstances. After battles, men would gather and remember who they were beyond soldiers. These traveling lodges helped maintain morale, and routine military lodges during the Revolution served a purpose modern soldiers would recognize immediately. They provided psychological relief. Combat is chaos. Death is random. Control is an illusion. But gathering for a Masonic meeting, even a simplified, makeshift version under canvas tents, gave soldiers a sliver of normalcy. The rituals were the same whether you performed them in Philadelphia or a muddy camp near Yorktown. Same words, same symbols, same structure. That consistency mattered profoundly when everything else kept changing. Who was still alive, where you'd march tomorrow, whether you'd eat that week. Lodges offered predictable routine in unpredictable circumstances. Officers and enlisted men could meet as equals, at least within the lodge, which provided rare moments of humanity in rigid military hierarchies. These meetings weren't distractions from duty. They reinforced it by giving men something to protect beyond territory. They were protecting a way of life, a community, values worth defending. The lodges reminded them why they fought. Masonic meetings avoided direct political debate. Here's something that might surprise conspiracy theorists convinced Freemasons secretly controlled politics. Lodges explicitly banned political discussions during meetings. Seriously. It was a rule. Members came from different backgrounds, different regions, different political opinions. If you let politics invade meetings, you'd have constant arguments instead of brotherhood. So, lodges established firm boundaries. You could be a loyalist or a patriot outside the lodge. During the Revolution, some lodges actually included both. But inside, you check that conflict at the door. No debating governance, no campaign speeches, no partisan arguments. Just ritual, fellowship, and shared meals. This wasn't avoidance, it was wisdom. Freemasonry thrived precisely because it offered refuge from the divisiveness consuming society outside. Men needed spaces where they could relate to each other as humans, not political opponents, where a merchant and a farmer could share bread without debating tariffs. This neutrality made lodges stronger, not weaker. Freemasonry promoted peaceful coexistence. After the revolution ended, America faced a challenge perhaps harder than fighting: living together. Patriots who'd fought the British now lived alongside former loyalists who hadn't. Regional tensions simmered. Economic disparities created resentment. The new nation was fragile, held together by ideals more than infrastructure. Freemasonry helped navigate this delicate period by continuing to emphasize its core principle: brotherhood transcending differences. Lodges brought together men from different backgrounds, different war experiences, different visions for America's future, and asked them to treat each other with respect and dignity. Not because they agreed politically, but because they shared membership in something larger. This wasn't magic, it was deliberate practice of coexistence. Veterans who'd fought on different sides could meet in lodge, perform the same rituals, break bread together, remember their shared humanity. Did this solve all conflicts? Of course not. But it created spaces where reconciliation was possible, where former enemies could become neighbors again. Lodges helped veterans reconnect with civilian life. War changes people. Everyone knows this. Soldiers return home carrying experiences civilians can't understand, facing a world that moved on without them. Revolutionary War veterans dealt with this too, though we rarely discuss it. They'd spent years in military structures, following orders, living with constant danger, watching friends die. Then suddenly, peace. Go home. Resume normal life. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Lodges provided crucial transition space for these veterans. The structure felt familiar: hierarchies, rules, ritual, but without the violence. The brotherhood echoed military bonds without the trauma. Veterans could gather with men who understood sacrifice and loss, even if they didn't discuss it directly. The meetings gave routine, purpose, social connection. Lodge offices gave leadership opportunities to men who commanded troops but now felt adrift in civilian economy. Mutual aid helped veterans facing financial struggles. It wasn't therapy. That concept didn't exist yet, but it was community-based support that helped men reintegrate. Post-war America saw a rapid expansion of new lodges. Once the revolution ended and life stabilized, Freemasonry absolutely exploded across America. New lodges formed everywhere. Existing lodges grew rapidly. By the late 1780s and through the 1790s, you could barely found a new town without someone immediately establishing a Masonic lodge. This expansion reflected broader American optimism and growth. The nation was building itself from scratch. New governments, new infrastructure, new communities. Lodges fit perfectly into this construction phase, offering social infrastructure when little else existed. Settlers moving west brought Freemasonry with them, establishing lodges as soon as they had enough members. Cities expanded their lodge networks. Rural areas finally gained population density to sustain meetings. The growth was organic, driven by genuine demand for the fellowship and structure lodges provided. This wasn't conspiracy spreading, it was community building. Men wanted belonging, wanted meaningful social participation, wanted connection to national identity beyond politics. Lodges offered all three. Freemasonry became a symbol of stability in the new nation. In early America, institutions were fragile. The federal government was experimental. State governments were still figuring things out. Churches faced denominational divisions. Commerce was chaotic. Nothing felt permanent, except Freemasonry, oddly enough. Lodges had history, continuity, traditions stretching back generations. They operated according to established rules. They maintained records. They existed before the nation and clearly planned to continue after. This made them seem stable in an unstable time, like anchors in social chaos. Prominent founders were Masons, Washington, Franklin, others, which associated the organization with national identity and legitimacy. Masonic symbols appeared in civic ceremonies, cornerstone layings, public celebrations. The organization became shorthand for order, morality, civic virtue, not because lodges claimed this role, but because Americans projected it onto them. People needed symbols of continuity, and Freemasonry fit. It looked established. It felt traditional. This visibility was both blessing and curse. Being associated with stability brought respect, but it also made lodges targets when stability faltered. Some Americans distrusted Masonry precisely because it felt organized. Here's where things get psychologically interesting. The same qualities that made Freemasonry attractive, structure, organization, rituals, hierarchy, also made some Americans deeply suspicious. Think about it. You've just fought a revolution against centralized authority. You've rejected kings, aristocracy, inherited power. You're building a democracy based on individual liberty and limited government. Then you notice this organization with titles like Worshipful Master and Grand Lodge, with formal hierarchies and secret rituals, with members who seem to recognize and help each other. Even if they're doing nothing wrong, it feels monarchical, organized, like the kind of structured authority you just rebelled against. This suspicion wasn't entirely irrational. In a republic, concentrated power threatens democracy. Secret organizations seem like potential power concentrations, even when they're actually just guys eating bread together. Americans were hypersensitive to threats against their new democratic experiment. Anything that looked like it might undermine individual liberty triggered alarm. Suspicion often grew during periods of rapid social change. Conspiracy theories about Freemasonry didn't emerge randomly. They peaked during specific historical moments when America was experiencing rapid, unsettling change. Economic panics, political upheaval, social transformation, times when people felt like the world was shifting beneath their feet and nothing made sense anymore. During these periods, humans instinctively look for explanations. Why is everything changing so fast? Who's responsible? What's really happening? Conspiracy theories offer comforting answers. There's a secret group controlling events. This makes chaos feel orderly, even if the order is malevolent. At least someone's in charge. At least there's an explanation. Freemasonry, being visible but private, mysterious but established, became a perfect target for these anxieties. When economic depression struck or political conflict intensified, people needed scapegoats. The Masons provided simple answers to complex problems. This pattern repeated throughout the 1800s and beyond. Each social crisis brought renewed suspicion, even when lodges had nothing to do with actual problems. Newspapers played a major role in shaping public opinion about Masons. In early America, newspapers were the internet, the primary way information and rumors spread beyond local communities. And newspapers loved writing about Freemasonry because mystery sells papers. Some newspapers were pro-Mason, publishing glowing accounts of lodge charity and civic ceremonies. Others were viciously anti-Mason, printing wild accusations and conspiracy theories as fact. Most readers had no way to verify these claims. If your newspaper said Masons controlled the banks or planned to overthrow democracy, you might believe it. You probably didn't know any Masons personally to contradict the claims. Information traveled slowly, corrections rarely caught up with accusations, and sensationalism always outpaced truth. Newspapers also amplified conflicts. A local dispute involving a Mason became Masonic conspiracy exposed in print. Isolated incidents became patterns. Coincidences became proof. This media dynamic shaped public perception far more than actual Masonic activities ever did. Lodge meetings were boring. Newspaper articles about lodge meetings were exciting. even if completely fabricated. Rumors about secrecy spread faster than verified facts. Here's a truth about human psychology: mystery spreads faster than documentation. Freemasonry kept detailed records, held public ceremonies, published charitable activities, operated openly in communities. This information was available to anyone interested, but it was boring. Meanwhile, rumors about secret rituals and hidden agendas? Fascinating. Those spread like wildfire. Someone would whisper, "Sorry, I heard Masons do strange things behind closed doors," and that rumor would travel farther and faster than any factual explanation ever could. Because brains love mystery. We're pattern seeking creatures attracted to the unknown, the hidden, the potentially threatening. Verified facts about dues collection and charity work can't compete with speculation about secret powers and shadowy influence. Even when Masons tried to explain themselves publicly, rumors won. You could publish minute books proving mundane organizational activities, but people preferred imagining midnight rituals and coded messages. This wasn't unique to Freemasonry. Every private organization faces this, but Masonic privacy made them particularly vulnerable. Freemasonry had no official role in the federal government. Let's address this directly. Freemasonry had zero, absolutely zero, official role in the U.S. federal government. None. Lodges couldn't vote on legislation. Grand Masters held no governmental authority. Masonic membership granted no political privileges whatsoever. The organization existed entirely outside governmental structures. Yes, many early American leaders were Masons, but they held power through elected or appointed positions, not through lodge membership. Their Masonic affiliation was personal, not political. George Washington was powerful because he was president, not because he was a Mason. If Freemasonry actually controlled the government, you'd expect formal structures, Masonic councils advising Congress, lodge approval required for appointments, constitutional provisions granting Masons special status. None of that existed. Government operated completely independently from Masonic organizations. When Masons served in office, they represented constituents or carried out appointed duties. Their lodge activities were separate, distinct, unrelated to governance. This separation was intentional and absolute. The U.S. Constitution makes no mention of Freemasonry. If you search the U.S. Constitution for references to Freemasonry, you'll find nothing. Zero mentions. Not in the articles, not in the amendments, not even implied references. The Constitution, that foundational document, allegedly written by Masons to establish Masonic control, somehow forgot to include anything about Freemasonry. Weird, right? You'd think a conspiracy to control America through secret society infiltration would leave some constitutional fingerprints. But no. The document focuses on government structure, individual rights, federal and state powers. Normal founding stuff. No special provisions for lodge members. No Masonic symbolism embedded in the text. No requirement that officials join lodges. Nothing. This absence is evidence. If Freemasonry had been central to founding the nation, constitutional framers would have mentioned it. They mentioned lots of specific things: religion, speech, assembly, arms, due process. They were detailed, thorough. If Masonic interests mattered, they'd be there. But the Constitution treats Freemasonry the way it treats any other private organization, by ignoring it completely. No president was required to be a Mason. Of the 45 individuals who've served as U.S. president, 14 were Freemasons, which means 31, the majority, were not. There was never any requirement, formal or informal, that presidents be Masons. Many didn't join. John Adams, not a Mason. Thomas Jefferson, nope. Abraham Lincoln, never joined. Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Masons. Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, not Masons. Reagan, nope. The Bushes, no. Clinton, Obama, Trump, Biden, none of them Masons. If Freemasonry controlled the presidency, you'd expect consistent membership among presidents. But the pattern is random. Some presidents joined lodges before entering politics, found fellowship there, maintained membership throughout life. Others never showed interest. Presidential power came from elections, political skill, historical circumstances, not lodge affiliation. Being a Mason didn't help you become president. Not being a Mason didn't prevent it. The correlation is coincidental, reflecting that some prominent men joined social organization and some didn't. That's it. Many prominent politicians never joined, all beyond presidents. Countless influential American political figures throughout history never joined Masonic lodges. Important senators, congressmen, governors, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, many didn't bother with Freemasonry. They built political careers through other networks, political parties, business connections, family influence, constituent service, pure ability. Freemasonry was one possible social organization among many. Some joined, many didn't. This reality undermines any theory of Masonic political control. If the organization controlled politics, membership would be mandatory or at least heavily beneficial. But plenty of politicians thrived without it, while some Masons never achieved political success despite membership. There was no secret ladder from lodge to power, no hidden pathway to influence, just ordinary networking that sometimes overlapped with political ambitions and often didn't. Many successful politicians joined different organizations, business clubs, churches, veteran groups, civic associations. Freemasons didn't monopolize political networking because dozens of other networks existed simultaneously. Masonic membership did not guarantee political success. For every George Washington who was both a Mason and politically successful, there were dozens of Masons who remained ordinary citizens their entire lives. Lodge membership didn't magically grant political power or social influence. Most Masons were tradesmen, shopkeepers, farmers, clerks, regular people living regular lives. They attended meetings, paid dues, enjoyed fellowship, supported charitable causes, and died in obscurity. Their membership didn't open secret doors to power. It gave them community. That's all. Even among Masons who entered politics, most served minor local roles, not national positions. They were town selectmen, county officials, local judges. Important to their communities? Sure. Powerful conspirators controlling America? Hardly. The vast majority of Masonic membership consisted of ordinary men seeking ordinary fellowship, not power-hungry schemers plotting governmental takeover. This reality, that most members were wonderfully mundane, is visible in lodge records, membership rolls, minute books, but it's boring evidence, not mysterious enough for conspiracy theories. Lodges did not endorse political candidates. Here's a firm rule that lodges took seriously. No political endorsements, ever. Lodges couldn't officially support candidates, promote parties, or involve themselves in elections. This was explicitly forbidden. Why? Because political endorsements would have destroyed lodges from within. Members held different political views. If the lodge endorsed one candidate, members supporting opponents would feel betrayed, alienated. Brotherhood would fracture along political lines. So lodges stayed rigorously neutral. They didn't endorse, didn't contribute funds to campaigns, didn't organize political action. Individual members could and did support candidates personally, participate in politics, even run for office themselves. But they did so as private citizens, not as Masonic representatives. The lodge stayed out of it. This neutrality frustrated people who assumed Masonic lodges must be political machines, but the evidence is overwhelming. Lodge records contain zero endorsements, zero political contributions, zero campaign coordination. They discussed ritual, charity, membership, finances, never election strategy. Masons were discouraged from discussing elections inside lodges. Not only did lodges avoid endorsing candidates, but members were actively discouraged from debating politics during meetings. The rule was clear: politics and religion were off limits inside the lodge. You could discuss moral philosophy, charity work, lodge business, ritual interpretation, but arguing about elections or policies, that conversation belonged outside. This wasn't censorship, it was boundary setting. Lodges existed to unite men across differences, not amplify those differences through political argument. When you've got supporters of different candidates in the same room, political debate destroys fellowship quickly. So, lodges simply didn't allow it. Members could argue about politics all they wanted elsewhere, at taverns, in homes, in public squares. But inside the lodge, you checked partisanship at the door. This discipline required genuine effort. Politics was consuming the nation, especially during tense periods. Men had strong opinions, but they honored the lodge boundary because they valued brotherhood more than political point scoring. Public Masonic ceremonies were often covered in newspapers. Despite all the mystery and secrecy claims, Freemasons regularly held very public ceremonies that newspapers covered extensively. Cornerstone layings, dedication ceremonies, Masonic funerals, civic celebrations. These events happened openly, often with large crowds watching. Masons would process through streets in full regalia, perform public rituals, give speeches that newspapers would then print verbatim. The ceremonies were designed to be seen, to demonstrate Masonic civic participation and community values. Nothing secret about them. In fact, lodges often wanted publicity for these events because they reinforced the organization's public legitimacy and civic purpose. Newspapers would describe the ceremonies in detail: what the Masons wore, what symbols they displayed, what speeches were given, how many people attended. This documentation directly contradicts secrecy claims. Yes, certain initiation rituals remained private, reserved for members. But Freemasonry operated very visibly in public spaces, participating openly in civic life. The paradox: public ceremonies alongside private rituals, confused people then and still confuses people now. Cornerstone laying ceremonies were symbolic, not governing events. When Freemasons performed cornerstone laying ceremonies for public buildings, they were participating in symbolic civic rituals, not exercising governmental authority. These ceremonies had ancient roots in building traditions, representing the foundation upon which structures, both physical and social, would be built. Masonic participation emphasized stability, proper construction, community values. The ceremonies were elaborate: Masons in regalia, symbols displayed, speeches about virtue and progress, the cornerstone ceremonially placed. Important people attended. Newspapers covered them. But here's what didn't happen. Masons didn't gain control over the building afterward. They didn't acquire governing authority over the institution housed there. They performed a ceremony, then went home. The building proceeded according to normal construction and governance. If Masons laid a courthouse cornerstone, they didn't control the court. If they dedicated a Capitol building, they didn't run the government housed inside. The ceremony was symbolic, cultural, traditional, like a ribbon cutting or blessing. These ceremonies emphasized unity and civic pride. The real purpose of public Masonic ceremonies was building community cohesion and civic pride. When Masons laid cornerstones or participated in civic celebrations, they were saying, "We're part of this community, we support these institutions, we share your values." The ceremonies brought people together, Masons and non-Masons alike, to celebrate shared civic identity and collective progress. Building a new courthouse, the ceremony marked community achievement. Everyone could feel proud. Constructing a library, the cornerstone celebration emphasized education and enlightenment as shared values. These weren't Masonic takeovers, they were community rituals that happened to use Masonic ceremonial frameworks because those frameworks emphasized appropriate values: stability, morality, order, our progress. The symbolism resonated with broader American ideals. Crowds gathered not because they feared Masonic power, but because they enjoyed public celebrations and civic pageantry. Humans like ceremonies. We like marking important moments with ritual and symbolism. Freemasons provided that cultural service, offering elaborate ceremonies when few other organizations could. Masonic regalia was worn openly during public events. If Freemasons were truly a secret society, they had a funny way of showing it. During public ceremonies, Masons wore their regalia openly: elaborate aprons, jewels, sashes, gloves, all the ceremonial gear that marked their membership and rank. These weren't hidden symbols glimpsed in shadowy corners. They were displayed proudly in broad daylight during civic events. The aprons, especially, were works of art. White leather or fabric decorated with Masonic symbols, sometimes embroidered with intricate designs. Different colors and decorations indicated different ranks within the organization. A past master wore different regalia than a new member. Everyone watching could see these distinctions. The public display served multiple purposes. It demonstrated Masonic civic participation, it honored the solemnity of ceremonies, and it made membership visible rather than concealed. You can't really claim to be a secret society when you're parading through Main Street wearing symbolic aprons and carrying ceremonial equipment, while hundreds of people watch and newspapers document everything. Spectators were encouraged to attend ceremonies, Masonic. Public ceremonies weren't exclusive affairs where only members could watch. Quite the opposite. Spectators were actively encouraged to attend. Lodges wanted community members present for cornerstone layings, dedication ceremonies, and civic celebrations. These events were part entertainment, part education, part community bonding. Families would come out to watch. Children lined the streets. Local officials participated. It was a whole civic production. The idea was to demonstrate Masonic values and community involvement publicly, making the organization visible and accessible, rather than mysterious and threatening. Spectators could see the ceremonies, hear the speeches, observe the rituals performed in public spaces. They might not understand every symbol or reference, but the overall message was clear. Masons supported civic progress and community values. This openness contradicts modern conspiracy theories about secrecy. Organizations hiding from public view don't invite crowds to watch their activities. They don't perform ceremonies on public streets. They definitely don't encourage newspaper coverage. Masonic processions were common in the 18th and 19th centuries. Picture this: a warm afternoon in 1800 something. Church bells ringing, streets lined with curious spectators. Then here come the Masons, processing in formation through town in full regalia. Officers carrying ceremonial items. Members walking in organized rows. Music playing, banners waving. These processions were regular features of American civic life throughout the 17 and 1800s. Lodges would march to cornerstone ceremonies, to church services, to civic celebrations, to funerals of prominent members. The processions served practical purposes, getting members from one location to another, but also symbolic ones. They demonstrated organizational discipline, civic participation, community presence. Masonic processions were spectacles, entertainment. In an era before television or movies, People enjoyed watching the pageantry. Children probably found it exciting. The visibility normalized Freemasonry, making it familiar rather than foreign or threatening. Of course, this public visibility also made lodges easy targets. Later, when suspicion grew, but for decades, these processions were just normal parts of American community life. These events helped normalize Freemasonry in public life. Repeated exposure breeds familiarity. When Americans in the 17 and 1800s saw Masonic ceremonies regularly, the organization became part of normal civic life. Not mysterious, not threatening, just another community institution participating in public events alongside churches, government officials, civic organizations. Children grew up seeing Masonic processions as routine. Adults accepted Masonic participation in cornerstone ceremonies as tradition. The symbols became recognizable through constant public display. This normalization was probably intentional. Lodges understood that mystery breeds suspicion, while visibility breeds acceptance. By participating openly in civic life, Freemasonry positioned itself as a normal, respectable institution supporting community values. For decades, this strategy worked. Americans generally accepted Masonic presence without alarm. Only when social anxieties peaked did people start reinterpreting this familiar presence as potentially threatening. But the visibility itself never changed. What changed was public perception, influenced by media, economic stress, and political upheaval. The processions continued, the ceremonies happened as always. Public interpretation shifted around them. Over time, such ceremonies became less common. By the late 1800s and into the 1900s, those elaborate public Masonic ceremonies gradually faded. Processions became rarer. Cornerstone ceremonies continued, but with less frequency and pageantry. Public displays of Masonic regalia decreased. Several factors contributed to this decline. American society changed. Industrialization shifted how people spent time and socialized. New forms of entertainment competed for public attention. Civic ceremonies generally became less elaborate across all organizations, not just Masonic ones. The anti-Masonic movement of the early 1800s also made lodges more cautious about public visibility. Even after that specific backlash faded, lodges remained somewhat more reserved than they'd been previously. Additionally, as membership demographics shifted and American culture changed, the grand public ceremonies felt increasingly old-fashioned. Lodges adapted to changing times by focusing more on internal activities and charitable work, less on public spectacle. This retreat from public visibility, ironically, probably reinforced conspiracy theories by making Freemasonry seem more mysterious again. Visibility had normalized them. Reduced visibility made them mysterious once more. Masonic symbols originated from stoneworking tools, not ancient secrets. The square, compass, level, plumb, all those iconic Masonic symbols that conspiracy theorists analyze for hidden meanings, they came from actual construction tools, real tools that real stonemasons used to build real buildings. That's it. That's the origin. Medieval stonemasons had guilds that used their professional tools as symbols representing moral qualities. A square ensures right angles. Symbolically, it represents moral rectitude and dealing fairly with others. A compass draws perfect circles by maintaining fixed boundaries. Symbolically, it represents self-control and keeping your behavior within proper limits. These were teaching metaphors, not secret codes hiding ancient wisdom. The connection between physical tools and abstract virtues was straightforward enough that regular people understood it without initiation into mysteries. When Freemasonry emerged as a fraternal organization in the 17th and 18th centuries, it borrowed this existing symbolic system because it worked. The metaphors were clear, the imagery was recognizable, the lessons were practical. No hidden conspiracy required. Symbols were used as teaching metaphors. Masonic symbols functioned as educational tools, visual representations of abstract moral principles. The organization used familiar objects to teach unfamiliar concepts, making philosophical lessons accessible and memorable. A level shows when surfaces are even. Metaphorically, it represents equality and treating all people fairly regardless of social rank. A plumb line ensures vertical accuracy. Symbolically, it represents uprightness and moral integrity. These weren't complicated mysteries requiring years of study. They were simple, clear metaphors that anyone could grasp. The pedagogical approach made sense. Abstract moral philosophy can feel distant and theoretical, but concrete objects make lessons tangible. When you see an actual square, you remember the lesson about moral rectitude. When you handle a compass, you think about self control. The symbols served as memory aids, visual reminders of ethical principles. This teaching method was practical and effective, which explains why it persisted for centuries. But conspiracy theorists ignore the straightforward educational purpose and instead imagine secret meanings, hidden codes, ancient mysteries. Sometimes a teaching tool is just a teaching tool. Different lodges sometimes interpreted symbols differently. Here's something that undermines theories about unified Masonic conspiracy. Lodges didn't always agree on symbolic interpretations. Different lodges sometimes emphasized different aspects of the same symbols. Regional variations existed. Traditions evolved differently in different areas. Some lodges might emphasize one particular meaning for a symbol, while others focused on different interpretations. This wasn't doctrinal crisis, it was natural variation within a decentralized organization. Freemasonry lacked central authority dictating exact interpretations. Local lodges had considerable autonomy in how they explained symbols to members. The core meanings remained consistent. The square represented morality, the compass represented self restraint, but specific applications and explanations varied. Some lectures might emphasize historical context, others focused on philosophical applications. Still others stressed practical moral guidance. This diversity actually demonstrates Freemasonry's flexibility and adaptability, but it also complicates conspiracy theories that require unified, coordinated action across all lodges. Organizations with slight regional variations in symbolic interpretation probably aren't orchestrating world domination with precision coordination. There was never a single universal explanation for every symbol. Despite what conspiracy theorists claim about hidden universal meanings, Masonic symbols never had one definitive, unchanging interpretation known to all members everywhere. The symbolic system was deliberately flexible, allowing for multiple layers of meaning and personal interpretation. A new member might understand the square as representing basic honesty. An experienced member might see deeper philosophical implications. Both interpretations were valid. The symbols were designed to grow with members, revealing new meanings as members matured in their understanding. This interpretive flexibility was feature, not bug. It made the symbols personally meaningful rather than rigidly dogmatic. Different eras emphasized different aspects. Different teachers explained symbols differently. Different traditions developed different elaborations on core meanings. This diversity prevented Freemasonry from becoming rigid or doctrinaire. But it also means no secret decoder ring exists, revealing the true meaning conspiracy theorists seek. The meanings were always multiple, flexible, contextual, which is frustrating if you want simple answers, but realistic if you understand how symbolic systems actually function. Rituals relied on repetition to reinforce moral lessons. Masonic rituals weren't performed once and forgotten. They were repeated constantly, meeting after meeting, year after year. This repetition wasn't boring redundancy, it was deliberate pedagogical strategy. Moral lessons sink in through repetition. The first time you hear a ritual, you grasp basic concepts. The 10th time, you notice details you missed. The 100th time, the meanings feel internalized, automatic. This learning through repetition is how humans absorb values and principles. Religious traditions use the same approach: repeated prayers, repeated services, repeated readings. The familiarity creates comfort, while the repetition reinforces lessons. Masons who'd participated in the same rituals for decades could probably recite them from memory, which meant the moral teachings embedded in those rituals became part of their mental framework. The repetition also created communal bonds. Everyone knew the same words, performed the same actions, shared the same experiences. This collective repetition built group identity and reinforced shared values. Not mysterious, not conspiratorial, just effective educational psychology applied to moral instruction. Many rituals changed slightly over time. Despite emphasizing tradition and continuity, Masonic rituals weren't frozen in time. They evolved. Slowly, yes, but noticeably over decades and centuries. Words changed, procedures adapted, new elements got added, old elements fell away. This evolution happened naturally as lodges adapted to changing times and circumstances. Sometimes changes were intentional. A Grand Lodge would standardize certain procedures, or lodges would vote to modify ritual elements. Other times, changes crept in gradually through imperfect memory and transmission. Before rituals were written down extensively, they passed through oral tradition, which inevitably produced variation. Even after written ritual books existed, different jurisdictions made different choices about which versions to use and how to interpret them. This evolution demonstrates that Freemasonry was living tradition, not static dogma. But it complicates conspiracy theories that imagine unchanging ancient rituals passed down through millennia. Real organizations change, real traditions evolve, real humans adapt rather than mechanically repeating identical procedures forever. Historical continuity exists, but so does historical change. Written ritual books were not widely circulated. For much of Masonic history, rituals existed primarily in oral tradition rather than written form. Members memorized rituals and taught them to new members through repeated practice. When ritual books did exist, they weren't widely distributed. They were closely held, available mainly to lodge officers who needed them for reference. This limited circulation wasn't necessarily about secrecy in the sinister sense. It reflected the belief that rituals should be experienced and memorized, not simply read. Written texts were memory aids, not primary instructional tools. The limited circulation also prevented ritual details from becoming public knowledge, which Masons believed would diminish their impact. If everyone knew exactly what happened during initiation ceremonies, the experience would lose its power for new members. This reasoning makes sense from a pedagogical perspective. Surprise and discovery enhanced learning. But limited circulation also meant most people outside Freemasonry had no accurate information about rituals, creating knowledge vacuum that speculation and rumor eagerly filled. The absence of widely available ritual text contributed significantly to misunderstanding. This limited access contributed to misunderstanding. When accurate information is scarce, people fill the void with speculation. Because ritual books weren't publicly available and Masons didn't explain their ceremonies in detail, outsiders had no reliable way to understand what actually happened in lodges. This information gap created perfect conditions for misunderstanding and myth-making. Without facts, people invented explanations. Without documentation, rumors went unchallenged. Without access, suspicion grew. If Masons had published detailed ritual explanations, much conspiracy theorizing might never have developed. But they didn't, partly from tradition. partly from belief that rituals should remain experiential, partly from simple organizational inertia. The result was predictable: mystery bred suspicion. People assumed that secrecy hid wrongdoing rather than simple preference for privacy. The lack of information became interpreted as proof of malicious intent. This wasn't entirely Mason's fault. Humans are naturally suspicious of what they don't understand, but limited access certainly didn't help. Organizations that want public trust generally need some degree of transparency. Freemasonry maintained privacy instead, for better and worse. Outsiders often assumed secrecy meant danger. Here's unfortunate human psychology. When people don't know what's happening behind closed doors, they often assume the worst. Private doesn't mean dangerous, but human brains struggle with that distinction. We evolved to be wary of the unknown, to suspect hidden threats, to imagine worst case scenarios. Freemasonry's privacy, reasonable from the organization's perspective, triggered these psychological suspicions. If lodges had nothing to hide, why meet privately? If rituals were innocent, why keep them from public view? These questions seem logical but rest on flawed premises. Privacy has legitimate purposes beyond hiding wrongdoing. Organizations deserve private spaces. Initiation ceremonies work better when kept experiential. But human suspicion doesn't respond to logical arguments. It responds to patterns that feel threatening. And private organizations with membership requirements and selective disclosure feel threatening to outsider brains, regardless of actual behavior. This psychological dynamic explains why conspiracy theories persisted despite evidence of Masonic ordinariness. Facts matter less than feelings when human threat detection systems activate. Masons rarely attempted public explanations. Faced with growing suspicion and wild accusations, Masons mostly said nothing. They rarely attempted systematic public explanations of their organization, rituals, or purposes. This silence was partly principled. They believed their activities were private matters not requiring public justification, and partly strategic. Responding to accusations might dignify them, acknowledge them as worth addressing. Many Masons figured the truth was available to anyone willing to look honestly, and those committed to conspiracy theories wouldn't be convinced by explanations anyway. This reasoning had some merit. But silence created problems. Without Masonic voices in public discourse, anti-Masonic voices dominated. Accusations went unchallenged. Myths spread unopposed. The public narrative about Freemasonry got shaped entirely by critics and conspiracy theorists, while Masons remained quiet. In hindsight, this strategy was probably counterproductive. Organizations facing public suspicion generally need to communicate openly, address concerns directly, provide accurate information proactively. Freemasonry's traditional preference for silence and privacy worked against them in the court of public opinion. Sometimes saying nothing speaks louder than saying something. Silence often fueled suspicion. The less Masons said publicly, the more suspicious people became. Silence created vacuum that speculation filled enthusiastically. If Masons won't explain themselves, people reasoned, they must have something terrible to hide. Innocent organizations defend themselves. Guilty ones stay silent. This logic was flawed, but psychologically compelling. The truth was simpler. Masons valued privacy and didn't think they owed public explanations for private activities, but this principled stance backfired. In public imagination, silence became admission of guilt. Lack of explanation became proof of conspiracy. Absence of defense became evidence of wrongdoing. This dynamic still operates today with any organization that values privacy over public relations. The more you refuse to explain, the more sinister people assume you must be. Fair or not, this is how human psychology works. Freemasonry learned this lesson repeatedly, but never quite adjusted strategy. They maintained their preference for privacy, even as that privacy generated ever more elaborate conspiracy theories. Principle is admirable, but sometimes pragmatic communication serves better than principled silence, especially when silence gets interpreted as secrecy and secrecy gets interpreted as danger. Anti Masonic pamphlets exaggerated lodge practices. During periods of anti Masonic sentiment, pamphlets flooded America making wild claims about lodge activities. These weren't careful investigative reports. They were sensationalized propaganda designed to shock and outrage readers. Former members, some genuine, some probably fabricated, would expose Masonic rituals, often exaggerating or completely inventing details to make them seem more sinister. Initiation ceremonies got described as terrifying ordeals. Simple symbolic actions became demonic rituals. Ordinary organizational meetings became plots against democracy. The pamphlets sold well because people loved scandalous revelations and conspiracy theories. Truth was less important than entertainment value and emotional impact. Publishers knew that Freemasons help orphans and widows wouldn't sell copies. Freemasons performed secret midnight rituals to control government, sold plenty. These exaggerations shaped public perception more than any actual Masonic behavior. People who'd never attended a lodge meeting formed opinions based on wildly inaccurate pamphlet descriptions. And once those opinions formed, they proved remarkably resistant to correction. Sensational lies spread faster and farther than boring truth. Some accusations were based entirely on hearsay. Not all anti Masonic accusations came from claimed firsthand experience. Many were pure hearsay, rumors passed person to person, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Someone heard from someone who heard from someone that Masons did terrible things. No verification, no evidence, no actual witnesses, just rumors achieving authority through repetition. This is how urban legends form and spread. The story sounds plausible enough, gets repeated enough times, and eventually people accept it as fact without questioning whether anyone actually witnessed what they're describing. Anti Masonic accusations followed this pattern perfectly. Wild claims spread through communities despite having no factual basis whatsoever. People repeated them because they'd heard them from sources they trusted, who'd heard them from sources they trusted, creating chains of hearsay leading back to nothing. No original credible source, no actual evidence. Just rumors that felt true because they confirmed existing suspicions and fears. This hearsay based belief system proved incredibly resilient because you can't disprove vague rumors. Freemasonry could document their actual activities endlessly, but rumors aren't constrained by documentation. Fear of Masonry reflected broader anxiety about social change. Anti Masonic sentiment was never really about Freemasonry specifically. It was about broader anxieties seeking convenient targets. When America experienced rapid social change, economic transformation, political upheaval, demographic shifts, cultural evolution, people felt unmoored and threatened. Change is scary. Loss of familiar structures is destabilizing. During these periods, humans look for explanations and scapegoats. Why is everything changing? Who's responsible? What's being destroyed? Conspiracy theories about Freemasonry provided satisfying answers. A secret organization was undermining traditional values. Hidden forces were orchestrating unwanted change. This explanation made chaotic change feel orderly, even if the order was malevolent. Better to imagine deliberate conspiracy than acknowledge that change happens through complex, impersonal forces no one fully controls. Freemasonry became symbol for everything people feared about modernity: organization, hierarchy, change, loss of individual autonomy. mysterious forces operating beyond public view. The actual organization mattered less than what it represented in anxious public imagination. Understanding anti-Masonic sentiment requires understanding the fears that fueled it, not the organization targeted. Mystery sometimes outlived reality. Here's the strangest part. Even as Freemasonry became increasingly ordinary, mundane, and visible, the mystique surrounding it persisted. Reality couldn't compete with mythology. Lodges published membership lists. Mystery remained. Members explained symbols publicly. Conspiracy theories continued. Historical documentation showed ordinary organizational activities. People preferred imagining secret plots. This disconnect between reality and perception demonstrates how powerful mythology becomes once established. The mysterious image of Freemasonry, created through combination of legitimate privacy, media sensationalism, public anxiety, and human love of conspiracy theories, proved nearly impossible to erase even when contradicted by readily available evidence. Modern researchers can access extensive historical documentation proving Masonic ordinariness. Doesn't matter. The mystery persists. Former members explain rituals in detail online. Conspiracy theories thrive. This phenomenon teaches important lessons about how public perception works, how mythology outlives facts, how human psychology prefers exciting fiction over boring documentation. Freemasonry became whatever people needed it to be in their imaginations, regardless of what it actually was in reality. Mystery, once established, achieves immortality. Freemasonry faced its first major backlash in the early 1800s. After decades of relative acceptance, Freemasonry hit a wall of public hostility in the 1820s. This wasn't gradual cooling of sentiment, it was sudden, intense backlash that threatened the organization's existence in America. The trigger was a specific incident in 1826 involving a man named William Morgan, who threatened to publish Masonic secrets. Morgan disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and Masons were blamed. Whether lodge members were actually responsible remains historically unclear, but public opinion didn't wait for evidence. Anti-Masonic sentiment exploded. Suddenly, the organization that had seemed respectable and civic-minded became suspect and threatening in public imagination. Lodges that had operated openly for decades faced hostility. Members faced social ostracism. The backlash was fierce, organized, and politically potent. This marked the first time Freemasonry faced existential threat in America, and the organization would never quite regain its previous unquestioned acceptance. The era of easy normalization had ended. The anti-Masonic Party briefly became a national political force. Out of anti-Masonic sentiment emerged something unprecedented: an entire political party dedicated to opposing Freemasonry. The Anti-Masonic Party, formed in 1828, became America's first significant third party. They ran candidates for office on platforms demanding Masonic abolition and transparency. They held conventions, published newspapers, organized rallies, mobilized voters. For several years, they wielded genuine political influence, especially in New York and Pennsylvania. The party attracted people genuinely concerned about secret societies and democratic transparency, but also opportunists using anti-Masonic sentiment for political advancement. The party's existence demonstrated how thoroughly suspicion of Freemasonry had penetrated American politics. You could build an entire political movement around opposing a fraternal organization. This seems bizarre in hindsight, but it worked. For a while, the anti-Masonic Party eventually faded as political focus shifted to other issues, but its brief prominence left lasting impact on how Americans viewed Freemasonry. This marked America's first third political party before the anti-Masonic Party American politics operated largely as two-party system, Federalists versus Democratic Republicans, then later Democrats versus Whigs. Third parties didn't really exist as sustained national forces. The anti-Masonic Party changed that, demonstrating that focused single-issue movements could organize politically and compete electorally. They held the first national presidential nominating convention in 1831, establishing precedent that major parties later adopted. They ran William Wirt for president in 1832, and while he didn't win, he carried Vermont and received 7 electoral votes. This wasn't marginal fringe movement. It was legitimate political force that had to be taken seriously. The party's existence proved Americans could organize around issues beyond traditional political divisions. It opened doors for future third party movements, establishing templates for focused political organizing. The irony is rich. Freemasonry, accused of secret political control, inadvertently inspired America's first significant third party dedicated to opposing them. Anti-Masonic newspapers published daily warnings. During the height of anti-Masonic fervor, newspapers dedicated entirely to opposing Freemasonry sprouted across America. These weren't occasional critical articles in general newspapers. They were entire publications existing solely to warn readers about Masonic dangers. Papers like the Anti-Masonic Inquirer and dozens of others published daily or weekly warnings about lodge activities, alleged conspiracies, and threats to democracy. The content ranged from legitimate political critique to wild conspiracy theorizing with little basis, in fact. Editors reprinted sensational stories, published exposés of questionable credibility, amplified fears and suspicions. The newspapers created echo chambers where anti-Masonic sentiment reinforced itself through constant repetition. Readers encountered daily confirmation that Masons were dangerous, creating psychological certainty regardless of evidence. This media saturation shaped public opinion powerfully. When you read daily warnings about a group, you start believing they're genuinely threatening. The newspapers served both to reflect and amplify anti-Masonic sentiment, creating feedback loop that sustained the movement. Public interest eventually faded. Like most intense political movements focused on single issues, anti-Masonic fervor eventually burned out. By the mid-1830s, public interest was waning. The anti-Masonic Party began losing electoral strength. Newspapers started closing. The passionate intensity that had driven the movement dissipated as Americans turned attention to other concerns. Economic issues, slavery debates, territorial expansion, other topics captured public imagination and political energy. Anti-Masonic sentiment didn't disappear completely, but it stopped being central political force. Several factors contributed to this decline. Time passed without the apocalyptic threats materializing that anti-Masons had predicted. Lodges continued operating without overthrowing democracy. Life went on normally. Additionally, the movement's political leaders moved toward other parties, as it became clear anti-Masonic Party couldn't sustain national viability. Voters shifted focus. The conspiracy theories persisted in some quarters, but the organized political movement fragmented and faded. Crisis passed. Though Freemasonry would never quite return to its previous unchallenged status. Lodges survived but became more cautious. The anti-Masonic period left permanent marks on American Freemasonry. Lodges survived, but they learned lessons about public visibility and political vulnerability. Many lodges became more cautious, less publicly assertive, more careful about drawing attention. The days of elaborate public processions and highly visible civic participation diminished. Not entirely. Masonic ceremonies continued, but with less frequency and fanfare. Lodges maintained lower profiles, operated more quietly, avoided unnecessary public controversy. This wasn't admission of guilt, but pragmatic response to demonstrated political risk. Why invite hostility when you can operate peacefully out of the spotlight? Membership patterns shifted too. Some men avoided joining because of social stigma. Others joined precisely because persecution made membership feel more meaningful, more like genuine commitment rather than casual social participation. The organization adapted, learning to exist in less universally welcoming environment. Freemasonry in America after the anti-Masonic period was more cautious, more private, more aware of political vulnerabilities. The era of easy acceptance had ended permanently. Freemasonry peaked in popularity in the late 1800s. Despite earlier backlash, Freemasonry actually reached its highest popularity decades later. The late 1800s and early 1900s saw massive growth in Masonic membership. Lodges multiplied, enrollment soared. By the 1920s, American Freemasonry boasted millions of members, proportionally the highest membership in the organization's history. What changed? Several factors combined. The Civil War had brought men together in fraternal bonds, making lodge membership feel natural afterward. Economic growth created middle class with leisure time and discretionary income for dues. Social life in late 19th century America centered heavily on fraternal organizations, and Freemasonry was one among dozens competing for members. The organization also adapted, emphasizing charity work and community service more prominently. Grand Lodge buildings became architectural landmarks in cities nationwide. Membership became marker of respectability, social connection, civic participation. For several decades, joining a Masonic lodge was simply what successful middle-class American men did. The peak wouldn't last, but while it did, Freemasonry seemed more American institution than mysterious secret society. Industrialization changed how Americans socialized. The late 1800s and early 1900s brought massive social transformation through industrialization and urbanization. These changes fundamentally altered how Americans lived, worked, and socialized. People moved from farms to cities, from agricultural rhythms to industrial schedules, from close-knit rural communities to anonymous urban neighborhoods. Traditional social structures weakened, extended families scattered, church communities changed. Americans needed new ways to connect, new structures for social belonging. Fraternal organizations, Freemasonry, Odd Fellows, Elks, dozens of others filled this gap perfectly. They provided structured social connection in increasingly disconnected world. You'd move to new city for factory work, join local lodge, instantly have social network and community. The organizations offered belonging, routine, purpose, mutual aid in environments that otherwise felt isolating and impersonal. This explains why fraternal organization membership exploded during this period. They answered genuine social needs created by economic transformation. Industrialization destroyed old social structures, but created conditions where new structures thrived. Fraternal organizations faced new competition. By the mid 1900s, fraternal organizations faced unprecedented competition for members' time, money, and attention. New forms of recreation emerged: movies, radio, automobiles enabling different leisure patterns. Professional organizations offered networking without ritual. Service clubs like Rotary provided civic engagement with less time commitment. Labor unions offered mutual aid for workers. Insurance companies provided financial security that had previously come through lodge mutual aid systems. Sports leagues, hobby clubs, community organizations, Americans suddenly had countless options for social connection beyond traditional fraternal lodges. Additionally, changing work patterns made regular evening meetings harder. Longer commutes, different shift schedules, working spouses, changing household dynamics, all reduced time available for lodge participation. Freemasonry and similar organizations that had thrived when they were primary social infrastructure now competed in crowded marketplace of alternatives. Many members chose options requiring less commitment or offering more immediate practical benefits. The organizations that had seemed essential to American social life began feeling optional. Television reduced participation in evening meetings. If you want to identify a single technology that devastated fraternal organization membership, look at television. When televisions became common household items in the 1950s, they fundamentally changed how Americans spent evenings. Previously, if you wanted entertainment or social connection, you had to leave home, go to lodge meeting, attend community events, visit neighbors. Television eliminated this necessity. You could stay home and be entertained. No need to travel to Lodge Hall on cold Tuesday nights when you could watch programming from your couch. The impact was dramatic and measurable. As television ownership increased, lodge attendance decreased. Younger generations especially chose television over traditional evening meetings. Why spend 2 hours on ritual and organizational business when you could watch whatever you wanted at home? The convenience gap was insurmountable. Lodges tried adapting, changing meeting times, shortening meetings, adding entertainment value, but couldn't compete with the sheer ease and comfort of staying home with television. This wasn't unique to Freemasonry. All organizations requiring regular evening attendance suffered similarly. Younger generations joined less frequently. By the mid to late 1900s, and younger American men showed decreasing interest in joining Masonic lodges. Each generation joined in lower numbers than the previous one. This wasn't targeted rejection of Freemasonry specifically. Young people were joining fewer organizations generally. Social patterns were changing. The fraternal organization model that had seemed natural and necessary to earlier generations felt outdated to younger ones. The elaborate rituals seemed old fashioned. The formal hierarchy felt unnecessarily rigid. The time commitment seemed excessive. Why spend hours at lodge meetings when you could pursue individual interests or spend time with family? Young professionals built careers through different networking methods. Social connection happened through different channels. Sure, the tight knit lodge brotherhood that had appealed to previous generations felt less necessary when you had college friends, work colleagues, hobby groups, and easier mobility allowing you to maintain relationships across distances. Freemasonry recruitment struggled because the organization's core offerings, structured fellowship, ritual meaning, mutual aid, addressed needs younger generations either didn't feel or met differently. Lodges adapted by emphasizing charity. Faced with declining membership and changing social relevance, Masonic lodges adapted strategically by emphasizing charitable work more prominently. This wasn't entirely new. Masons had always done charity, but it became more central to organizational identity and public image. Lodges increased donations, established scholarship programs, supported hospitals, funded children's services. They publicized this charitable work, using it to demonstrate ongoing community value even as membership declined. The strategy made sense. If people weren't joining for fellowship and ritual, maybe they'd join to participate in meaningful charitable work. If public perception questioned Masonic relevance, visible charity proved continued social contribution. Grand lodges established foundations managing millions in charitable assets. Masonic hospitals and children's organizations became significant healthcare providers in some regions. The Shriners, a Masonic affiliated organization, built network of children's hospitals providing free care. This charitable emphasis gave lodges renewed purpose and public legitimacy, helping them survive membership decline by demonstrating continued social value. Masonic hospitals and foundations expanded. As membership recruitment struggled, Masonic organizations invested heavily in institutional charitable infrastructure. Grand Lodges established foundations with substantial endowments. Masonic hospitals expanded or were newly built, providing healthcare to communities. The Shriners Hospitals for Children, perhaps the most visible Masonic charitable enterprise, grew into a network of pediatric hospitals offering specialized care regardless of families' ability to pay. These institutions represented millions of dollars in charitable assets and provided genuine community benefit. They also served organizational purposes. They demonstrated Masonic social relevance, provided tangible evidence of positive community impact, gave members meaningful shared purpose beyond internal rituals and fellowship. The hospitals and foundations became more visible to general public than lodges themselves. Many Americans encountered Masonic charity through these institutions without necessarily connecting them to the broader organization. The charitable infrastructure outlasted membership peaks, continuing to operate even as lodge attendance declined. In some ways, these institutions became Freemasonry's most enduring legacy, serving communities long after the organizational membership that funded them had diminished. Membership declined but did not disappear. Throughout the late 1900s and into the 21st century, Masonic membership declined substantially from its mid-century peak. Lodges closed, particularly in rural areas where maintaining membership became impossible. Grand lodge buildings that had been architectural showcases became financial burdens, sometimes sold to other organizations. Membership rolls that had numbered in the millions dropped significantly. Some observers predicted Freemasonry would disappear entirely, becoming historical curiosity rather than living organization. But it didn't disappear. It declined certainly, but stabilized rather than collapsing completely. Lodges that survived often did so by consolidating, adapting to smaller membership, focusing on quality of experience rather than quantity of members. Some lodges found renewed purpose serving members who genuinely valued traditional fellowship and ritual rather than men joining out of social obligation. The organization became smaller but perhaps more intentional. Troy, members who joined in an era when membership was optional and slightly countercultural often showed deeper commitment than those who joined when it was simply expected social participation. Freemasonry became quieter, rather than secretive. The decline in Masonic visibility shouldn't be confused with increased secrecy. Freemasonry became quieter, less publicly prominent, less culturally central, less visible in civic life, but not more secretive. The organization remained as transparent as it had been. Membership records were still accessible. Public ceremonies still occurred. Historical documentation remained available. What changed was cultural prominence. Fewer Americans encountered Freemasonry in daily life. Fewer people knew Masons personally. The organization moved from mainstream civic institution to more niche interest. So, this increased obscurity ironically fueled new conspiracy theories. When organizations fade from public consciousness, mystery fills the vacuum again. People who didn't remember when Freemasonry was normal civic organization found it easier to imagine as sinister secret society. The quietness was about relevance, not secrecy. Lodges weren't hiding. They were simply less important to American social life than they'd been a century earlier. Less noise, less visibility, less cultural centrality, but not actually more secret. Modern Freemasonry is largely decentralized. One fact that complicates conspiracy theories about coordinated Masonic control. The organization is remarkably decentralized. There's no single governing body controlling all Masonic lodges. Instead, Grand Lodges operate at state level in America, each governing lodges within its jurisdiction independently. These Grand Lodges recognize each other and share basic principles, but they don't answer to central authority. No international Masonic headquarters dictates policy. No Supreme Council coordinates activities across lodges. Different Grand Lodges sometimes disagree about policies, recognition of other lodges, interpretations of traditions. They operate independently, making decisions that suit their jurisdictions without requiring approval from higher authority because no higher authority exists. This decentralization makes coordinated conspiracy impossible. Getting hundreds of independent Grand Lodges worldwide to coordinate secret activities would require communication and organization that leaves evidence. But no such coordination exists because no structure enables it. Freemasonry is federation of independent organizations sharing traditions, not hierarchical conspiracy with centralized control. This fundamental organizational structure contradicts most conspiracy theories, but gets ignored because it's inconveniently factual. Local lodges operate independently below Grand Lodge level. Individual local lodges operate with substantial autonomy. They elect their own officers, manage their own finances, make their own decisions about activities and priorities within guidelines set by their Grand Lodge. Lodge A might focus heavily on ritual proficiency. Lodge B might emphasize social activities. Lodge C might center on charitable work. They're all valid approaches, reflecting local preferences and member interests. This autonomy means Masonic experience varies significantly depending on which lodge you join. Some lodges meet weekly, others monthly. Some have dozens of members, others barely maintain minimum numbers. Some own impressive buildings, others rent space. Some attract younger members, others consist mainly of retirees. This diversity demonstrates organizational flexibility, but also complicates any narrative about unified Masonic agenda. Organizations pursuing coordinated conspiracy don't allow individual chapters to just do whatever they want, but Masonic lodges do exactly that, operating independently within loose framework of shared traditions and basic principles. It's messy, decentralized, very democratic, and completely incompatible with conspiracy theories requiring tight coordination. Historical membership records are widely accessible today. If you want to research Masonic membership, you can. Historical records are widely available to researchers. Lodge minute books sit in archives and historical societies. Membership rolls can be accessed. Grand Lodge proceedings were often published and distributed. Modern researchers have examined these records extensively, documenting exactly who joined lodges, when they joined, what they did, how much they paid. This documentation exists because lodges kept careful records and, importantly, preserved them. Many organizations from the 17 and 1800s left minimal documentary evidence. Freemasonry left extensive evidence because they valued record keeping and maintained it consistently. Any researcher willing to visit archives can examine original documents showing completely ordinary organizational activities. So, the records don't reveal hidden conspiracies because there weren't any. They reveal dues collection, charity distributions, membership votes, disciplinary proceedings, building maintenance discussions, completely mundane organizational management documented in painstaking detail. This accessible documentation should end conspiracy theories. It doesn't, because people who believe conspiracies aren't interested in documentary evidence. But for anyone actually curious about historical reality, the records are available. Many myths persist despite available documentation. Here's the frustrating part. Despite overwhelming documentary evidence of Masonic ordinariness, myths persist. You can show someone lodge minute books proving mundane activities. They'll claim the real secrets weren't written down. You can explain organizational structure demonstrating decentralization. They'll insist hidden coordination happens behind the scenes. You can point to accessible membership records. They'll argue important members were kept secret. Every piece of evidence contradicting conspiracy theories gets reinterpreted to preserve the theory. This isn't unique to Freemasonry, it's how conspiracy thinking works generally. Evidence doesn't matter when belief is emotionally or psychologically necessary. Some people need to believe in hidden forces controlling events because that's more comforting than acknowledging complex reality where no one's fully in control. Others find meaning in uncovering supposed secrets, enjoying the feeling of knowing something others don't. Still, others build identities around conspiracy beliefs that become difficult to abandon regardless of evidence. So myths persist, documentation notwithstanding. Facts and beliefs occupy different psychological spaces. Freemasonry reflected American society more than it shaped it. If you step back and look at Freemasonry's entire American history objectively, a clear pattern emerges. The organization reflected broader social trends more than it created them. When America valued hierarchical organization, lodges emphasized hierarchy. When democracy became cultural priority, lodges operated democratically. When Americans craved fraternal fellowship, membership boomed. When social patterns shifted away from fraternal organizations, membership declined. Masonic participation in civic ceremonies reflected American love of public ritual, not Masonic control of government. The organization grew when it served genuine social needs and declined when those needs were met differently. This doesn't mean Freemasonry had no influence. Individual Masons certainly influenced society through their work and civic participation, but the organization as organization was more mirror than engine. It adapted to American culture rather than shaping it fundamentally. This is perhaps the most boring interpretation possible, which is why conspiracy theories remain more appealing. But historical evidence supports the boring interpretation overwhelmingly. Its greatest legacy may be how much people imagined about it. Here's the ultimate irony. Freemasonry's most lasting cultural impact might be the mythology surrounding it rather than anything the organization actually did. The conspiracy theories, the mystery, the speculation, the wild accusations, the imaginative interpretations, these have influenced American culture more profoundly than lodge meetings ever did. Freemasonry became canvas onto which Americans projected anxieties, fears, hopes, and fascinations. The organization itself was relatively ordinary, but the mythology became extraordinary. Books, movies, television shows, internet theories, countless cultural products center on imagined Masonic conspiracies that never existed. This mythology reveals more about American psychology than about Freemasonry. It shows how humans handle mystery, how we process social change, how we create explanations for complex events, how we develop and maintain beliefs despite contrary evidence. The real Freemasonry was men gathering for fellowship, performing rituals, teaching moral lessons, supporting each other through life's difficulties, contributing to their communities. The imagined Freemasonry was omnipotent conspiracy controlling world events. One was real but boring. The other was fiction but fascinating. Guess which one people remember? And here, finally, we reach the end of our journey through Masonic history, having learned that sometimes the most interesting thing about an organization is not what it was, but what people thought it might be. Sleep well. And there you have it. 101 facts about an organization that spent centuries being accused of controlling everything, when mostly they were just trying to collect dues and keep accurate minutes. The real conspiracy, if you want to call it that, was how successfully humans convinced themselves that mystery meant danger, that privacy meant plotting, so that a group of middle-class men eating bread together after philosophical discussions must somehow be orchestrating world events. Freemasonry's greatest achievement wasn't shaping America. It was proving that people will always prefer exciting fiction over accessible documentation. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember, somewhere out there, a conspiracy theorist is convinced this video is Masonic propaganda. And somewhere else, A Freemason is wondering if anyone paid the lodge rent this month. The truth, as always, is far less exciting than the imagination. Sleep well. And maybe tomorrow, read some primary sources instead of internet theories. Sweet dreams.